It's dawn, and Alpha Troop 19 is commuting to war. 21 GIs bound for a jungle clearing a mile from the Cambodian border.
As the war and possible solutions to it are discussed in other parts of the world, the results of the North Vietnamese offensive are an unforgettable reality here in South Vietnam. Long after the fighting stops, as it surely eventually will, all of this will remain part of the long heritage of the Vietnam War.
When I was serving over there, I was, gung-ho. I felt my country was doing the right thing. I had no questions about serving there. And it was only years later, after my brother died, that I began to develop an animosity about the war and the enemy we had fought there. So it took me a lot longer to do that reversal, but I got there as well.
How does one atone for the horrors committed in Vietnam? How can a country attempt to rewrite the wrongs from that dark, needless past? To get a better picture of why it remains so important for so many Vietnam veterans to finally achieve some sort of closure, it's important to remember how many of them were treated when they returned home.
The reasons for U.S. involvement in Vietnam were a bit murkier. At the height of the Cold War, America's leaders were determined to stop the spread of communism. So they threw their support behind the South Vietnamese to prevent a takeover by the Communist North. But unlike World War II, there wasn't even a formal declaration of war, and a majority of Americans weren't concerned with the affairs of the Vietnamese. But President Lyndon B. Johnson and the powers that be wanted a win against communism. So the U.S. escalated involvement, sending over 2 million troops to Vietnam throughout the course of nearly a decade. In contrast to World War II, many potential Vietnam recruits actively avoided the draft. Muhammad Ali, one of the most famous examples.
Hell no, we won't go! Hell no, we won't go!
Support for the troops at home also reflected the nation's attitudes toward the two wars.
There was a long overdue proper send-off at the Austin airport today as more than 100 veterans took off for Washington, D.C.
We're getting ready to board, y'all. Y'all ready to go to Washington, D.C.? All right, let's do this. Thank y'all so much.
So many of them were told, don't wear your uniform in the airport because they would have been cursed at and spit on. And so tonight is huge. It's a door that has needed to been open for a very long time, and we're finally getting to open that door and welcome these guys back.
Last year, ESPN reported on the Pittsburgh Steelers legend, Rocky Bleier, and his emotional trip back to Vietnam.
At 72 years old, Rocky Bleier returned to Vietnam for the first time in 5 decades. And on August 20th, 2018, 49 years to the day after he was wounded, he returned to the valley where it happened.
As I look back, and having gone all through that, was maybe a catharsis I'd never had before. I don't need to go back to Vietnam again. And maybe for me, it accomplished what it needed to accomplish as a closure in that part of my life.
Today, I am announcing the normalization of diplomatic relationships with Vietnam.
For others, most notably former Secretary of State John Kerry, normalizing relations with Vietnam was paramount in the redemption process. Kerry founded Vietnam Veterans Against the War and gave a telling speech about it in 1971.
The United States washes her hands of Vietnam. Someone has to give up his life so that the United States doesn't have to admit something that the entire world already knows, so that we can't say that we've made a mistake. Someone has to die so that President Nixon won't be, and these are his words, the first president to lose a war. And we are asking Americans to think about that. Because how do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam? How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake?
Today, the Vietnam you'll find is, as it always was, a magical place. Veterans continue to return in hopes of making peace with their enemies of long ago. While the redemption process is long from over, both the United States and Vietnam have continued to make positive strides towards everlasting peace. The future is hopefully bright between both of these countries.